In this video, I want to cover mortgages and foreclosures, especially after or during a recession. So in order to start talking about that, what we first need to do is set some basic terms and help you kind of understand some of those basic concepts. So before I can get into the different options that are out there, I need to give you kind of these ideas. So let's start by giving you kind of some basic ideas here. So if I come over here and say I have myself a house. Okay. In order to have a house, what you have to do is you have to take out a loan. Okay. So a loan on a house is called a mortgage. And a mortgage, interestingly enough, if you break out the term here, mort, or you might think of it as muerte, or some other terms like that, you can kind of actually get the idea. That's actually death. And gage means payment. So, interesting factoid for you. Mortgage in Latin, I think, is actually described as death payment. And what this is really the payment, at least when the payments were initially created for this kind of thing, when you were talking about owning property, they were going to last your lifetime. So when you died, that property or that thing would return back to the original owner or something like that. And there are still loans and payments like that that happen in other countries. I know some that have happened like in England and where you buy a life term on a piece of property. But anyway, so we're talking about mortgages. Let's get our brush there. So we're talking about our mortgages. Okay. So a mortgage is a certain amount of money or debt that you're going to pay for that property. Now what happens is this property might be worth, well, we'll just say $200,000, right? Okay. So you go into the bank and you say, I want to buy this house that's located at this place. And they say, great, okay, it's going to cost you $200,000. And you say, wonderful, okay. So we've established what the mortgage is. Now, before I can get this loan or debt, what I have to do is come up with a down payment. And a down payment is usually somewhere between 2 to 10% of the full amount. So what ends up happening is if I'm going to pay 10%, that means I'm going to come up with $20,000 in cash. Bear in mind we're talking in cash. And then I'm going to take out a loan or a mortgage for the rest of that 180. So that's how I get my 200 total. Okay? But this right here is your down payment. So my down payment is that part of the purchase price that is paid in cash up front. Okay? Now what happens is I'll have a schedule, and it's usually for 30 years. And there's variations of this, and we'll get to some of these variations here. But for 30 years, I'm going to pay X amount. For simplistic purposes, we're going to say I'm going to pay $1,000 a month for 30 years. So I have 30 payments. Let's do it the other way around. So I have 12 payments in a year, and I have 30 payments. So I'm going to have 360 payments of $1,000. Now, you look at this and you say, well, hold on a second. That means that I'm going to pay $360,000. You see that? 360 payments of $1,000, right? But the loan on my house was only going to be $200,000, right? I mean, that's what the purchase price was, right? Yeah, that's actually true. What happens is every payment that you have, say in payment 1, I'm going to pay that $1,000. But what happens is only a certain amount of that is going to go to what's called the principal, or the equity of the house. Okay, so that 100,000, and this is going to sound kind of shocking, but really the bank wants to get paid first. So they're going to say that $900 of that payment is going to go towards interest, and the other $100 is going to go towards principal. So you can see that my $1,000 breaks out into this kind of thing. And these are just general numbers. If this was an accounting class, or even if I was going to get into a business class or a real estate class, I'd actually go through some actual numbers, pull up a spreadsheet, we go through this. But what happens is, over time, I go ... and I go down to payment 350, payment 350. I'm still paying that $1,000, but what happens is now it's almost completely shifted, that I'll pay about $100 in interest, and I'll pay $900 in principal. So the reason why this is so interesting or relevant here is because your payments really comprise a whole large amount of interest, and that's the difference between the purchase price of a house and the actual amount that you're going to pay. And that amount changes every payment that you make, and you pay a lot of interest at the beginning and very little at the end. As you pay down the principal, or as you pay down, as you pay down the actual debt, the principal, your interest level drops as well. So there's a lot more that's relevant to that. But I wanted to lay out some of these kind of terms. So we've talked about down payment. And we've talked about the interest. Now let's talk about what a home equity loan is. Okay, so I'll clear a little more space. So say I'm back to this point here so now let's talk about what a home equity loan is. Now a home equity loan is where I had the purchase, I paid the amount for the house of $200,000, but I've actually paid down the debt, say $50,000, right? So now I have a loan of $150,000 on a $200,000 home. Okay, so this is how much equity. That's how much equity I have in the house. Okay, so a home equity loan is me borrowing against this. So I can go to the bank and I can say, I need to borrow $30,000. The bank will look at the value of the home, how much I've paid in, what the existing balance is, and here's where they say, okay, well, yeah, you can borrow against that equity. And what they'll do is they'll tack that back on to the mortgage. So now my mortgage goes back up to $180,000, and I get this in some sort of cash to do whatever it is I needed to do. Maybe a home repair or some sort of for whatever reason necessary. But what I can do is I'm pretty much getting a loan on this equity. And it goes right back into the mortgage of the house, but you can borrow against that. So it's it can be a very useful tool, but it can also get people into a lot of trouble because you're not paying down the equity. The interest on your house is still very high, and so you know your plan of actually paying off your mortgage um, uh, gets slowed down by taking these home equity loans. Okay. Now, a couple of things we didn't really talk about here, um, and I just jumped to kind of some payments here, but a couple of things like interest rates, and we did talk about the time of a loan, right? But these are all kind of things that are essential for you to have and know about in your contract. Now you'll hear about some of these, and you'll definitely hear about them once you start, anytime you start looking at a house and you get kind of cleared for that stuff, you suddenly become very interested in the interest rates of what's going on. And that's because the interest rates directly affect how much you're going to pay in interest. So if my interest rate is something bad like 10%, right? I'm going to pay a huge amount over the life of the loan for this thing. If my interest rates are at 5% or something like that, that's what affects when they come to you, and what they'll do is they'll actually sit down and they'll say, here's your mortgage amount, right? And then you're going to be doing this for 360 payments, right? And so then they tell you, here's how much you're going to actually pay, and it's it can be 3 to 4 times the amount of the purchase price. In this economy, it's probably more like 2 to 3. So, you say, well, I'm buying a $200,000 home, I should be paying $200,000. Well, that's how much you took the loan on, but you have to pay the interest. So it's going to be, $360,000 or something like that you're actually going to pay over the life of that loan. Okay, so the interest rate directly affects that. Now, there's a couple other things that are interesting. If I take out a loan, or if I take out a mortgage, and we'll get into some of the different options that you have, but you could, and people do this, they'll get a mortgage and they'll go on it for a certain way, but then the interest rate changes. So that interest rate drops. So it's 10% and it's really high. But I was able to get into the house. When the interest rate drops to 5%, people will refinance the home. So they'll pay off whatever the existing loan is, and then they'll renegotiate this 5% for another 360 payments. Or maybe they'll shorten the payments. They can. These are all variables. You've got the number of payments, the percentage, and the amount of down. So there's your payments, your interest rate, and how much you're going to put down for a down payment. Right. So if I do 5, say I'll do 3%. Right. Those 3 factors really determine what kind of loan you're going to get. And if the interest rates are changing, or if you've got enough money to do, a large down payment, something like that, or you want to change the life of the loan. So this is a 30-year loan, but that's a really bad 30-year loan, but that you can also get them in 15-year. I've seen 10. I think I've seen a 20 before, but usually it's this 30 or 15-year. Those are the ones that you see a lot. So those are all the variables that happen in housing. Now, the reason why I go through all of that basic housing terminology is because when we start talking about the housing market and what we do with foreclosures and stuff, these are all of those numbers kind of come into play for that stuff. So first, let me talk about the Truth in Lending Act. So the Truth in Lending Act. Okay, a couple things this does. It gives you the rights, and it forces the lending company to give you those terms. So they are going to give you that annual percentage rate, or that's what I was showing as interest. Okay, they have to show you that amount, right? They have to show you what kind of fees that they're going to charge you. Okay, they're going to show you the cost of the loan, all of those things, and the key one for me is the actual amount of the loan. So when they say, here's your down, here's the the amount that the house is worth, plus all these fees, you get to an actual amount of the loan. And they list all that stuff out. So they have to show you that amount that, where you go from what you thought was the $200,000 home to realizing that you're paying $360,000, over the life of the loan. They have to show you these numbers. That's part of this Truth in Lending Act. Okay? So you have the right to the terms that you're going to see. You also have the right to be protected from some unfair practices. So in some cases, prepayment penalties can be considered an unfair practice. That's where, if you said, oh, I want to pay down my loan because I've got this huge amount of money, they can, they used to, I don't think this happens very often anymore, but they could say, oh, well, if you're going to pay it down, that's going to affect your contract, and it's going to cost you $20,000 to do that. And you go, what? Why is that? They say, well, that's part of your contract. You can't prepay or pay down, early the amount. We expected you to be in this loan for 30 years, and that's what you got to do. So that kind of stuff. Other examples of unfair practices might be changing the appraisal value, so or pressuring an appraiser who would come in and assess the house and say, well, the house is only worth $150,000, and suddenly you've been willing to take out a loan for $200,000 and the appraisal comes in at less. That's not a good sign for you. So they can do things, not that they do, but this protects you from getting where these appraisals would not show what the true actual value is of the home. And also things like false advertising. Hey, I thought I was getting a 30-year loan. Oh, really? It's a 35-year loan. And you don't see that. It's like, what? I thought I was getting a fixed rate, and no, you're getting an adjustable rate. Oh, well, I didn't realize what that meant. Things like that. So they have to give you that information, and you are protected thanks to that Truth in Lending Act. The other thing that it does, so they have to disclose all of that information. Remember I was saying, the terms, where we're talking about the interest, or that percentage, your down payment, the actual amount of the loan, all of those things. They have to give you that stuff, and it's called a disclosure. Okay? They have to give that to you in a certain amount of time, and they do that before the loan itself is finalized. So you get this first. So first, right? And then it can be anywhere, but it's like 3 to 7 days or something like that after the disclosure has happened, then the loan itself is finalized. And the reason why they do this is, this is your, suddenly I realized how unhappy I am, things have changed, I got cold feet, that kind of stuff. You can back out of the loan. You can say, nope, sorry, I thought I was going to be able to do this, and I'm just not able to. So you've got this little bit of time here before the loan is finalized. So they have to give you the disclosure before the loan is finalized. Hopefully that's kind of straightforward. Now, if they screw up in this disclosure right here, they don't give you all this information, your time period here can change. And that can go up to, crazy amounts of time, like 3 years. Suddenly you got 3 years to decide whether or not you're going to back out of that loan, which is weird. I haven't actually seen that come into play. But, that's actually your right to rescind. That's what it's called. RESCIND. That's your right, thanks to, once again, the Truth in Lending Act. Gives you those rights. Now, let's talk about something that's currently going on, and that is foreclosures. We're talking about a foreclosure on a house. What happens in essence, let me fix up my house here a little bit, take out a little equity. Maybe I want to fix up my house a little bit better. I'm going to give myself a nice red roof. Let's just do that right now. Boom. Ah, what a beautiful house. I'm just so proud of it. Okay. Now, I've been living in this house now for 10 years. Okay. But suddenly I've lost my job. So what happens in that situation is I'm not able to make my payments. Okay, you remember that $1,000 that I was paying every month? Suddenly I've got no money. Right? I'm not able to pay that. Well, I had a mortgage, I had a loan, that said I was going to do that for 30 years. Well, what happens now? Now is when we have to deal with something called foreclosure. And foreclosure is really the process that allows the lender to legally take the house or take that property because there was a loan on it. Okay, so here I am 10 years down the line, right? The house was this beautiful $200,000 home. I've paid in, $50,000 in equity, right? So my loan is at $150,000, right? But I can't make these payments anymore. That's it. I just don't have, lost my job. I just can't do it. So the bank sits there and goes, okay, well, we did get some money from this thing. The guy currently has that much into it. But the bank, is still owns the property. I mean, I don't have the deed to the house yet because I haven't paid the full loan amount. So the bank still owns the property. So now the bank is going to, in essence, kick you out. So here's my little guy going out. Whoa! There you go. He gets out of the house, and the bank starts to look for new buyers. So this is step 1, and then this is let's engage with this guy, step 2. Okay, the foreclosure is this part right here. Now there are a couple things that happen in a foreclosure. So not only do I get out, but then the bank has to address this loan, right? So currently, even though I'm out of the house, I still owe this amount. It's not like once I'm just kicked out, everything's good to go. No, I'm on the hook for this amount. So what the bank will do is they'll court new buyers. Okay, they'll do this in several ways, and we'll talk about some of these here in a second. But just generally from a foreclosure, if the bank then turns around and sells the house to someone else, and say they sell it at 180,000, right? This buyer comes in and they buy it at 180,000. Well, the bank doesn't get to keep that difference, right? The 150 pays off my loan, leaving 30,000 in profit. Okay, that goes to me. Okay, the scenario could just as likely go bad, and it could be that the bank sells it for more than likely 120,000. Right? Now suddenly I have 30,000 in lost profit. Right? So I've lost. Okay. I'm still on the hook for that same amount. Right? So whatever gets resold at, how close it is to the amount, that's what happens. The profit or loss is still with me. So even though I'm out of the house, I still have to make payments on this 30,000 to the bank. Okay. Now I do have the right to redeem the property. So that's the right of redemption. And in that situation, while this is going on, while the let's give myself another color here. While the bank is working with this second guy right here, and they're negotiating this kind of term thing here, I all of a sudden come up with, $150,000. I go on a game show, I get the money. I've got a rich uncle who nobody's ever heard of, who gives me all the money, whatever the case is. Suddenly I can take that money and I can bring it over to the bank and say, I've got the right of redemption to take this house back. And the bank will not go through with this and will allow me to go back into the house. Now that only happens if this situation hasn't been completed yet. Okay, so even though I've defaulted on the loan, I haven't really talked about that word, but default, there we go, meaning I quit making my payments, I got kicked out, all part of that kind of foreclosure piece of it. Even though I've defaulted on my loan, I can still go back in and, based on the right of redemption, claim that house if I can just pay off the loan, the amount of the original debt. Okay. So that is the generals of foreclosure. Now, we went through a lot of terms there, but it's going to help out a lot here when I start talking about the different options that are now available in in a recession or in this type of economy. What different options do we have? Well, there's really quite a few options that are available, more than most people think of, and it just depends on the bank and the kind of how interested they are. I've often said, if you have a small debt, that's your problem. If you have a big debt, it's everyone's problem. So, if it's a large enough amount and the banks are worried enough, then they'll come up with some creative options to help you. One of those is to you can get like an interest-only mortgage. And what happens is on an interest-only mortgage, you just pay that interest amount. You don't pay anything on the principal. And you do that for 3 to 10 years. And after that, then you have to start making the principal, the payments on the principal. But for the for that interest-only mortgage, you just are paying the interest amount. So remember, in that situation, instead of a $1,000 monthly payment, I've got a $900 payment. Right? So it's cheaper. It's only cheaper in one sense. I mean, your out of pocket initially is lower, but you haven't paid anything down on the principal over that period of time, so that interest is still very high. But nevertheless, you need something that is one option that's out there. Now, that's kind of part of what we'd call forbearance. And a forbearance, that's really the delayment, or like the postponement of part or all of the payment of a loan, because the bank is worried about someone foreclosing. So this interest-only mortgage is kind of like that, but the forbearance meaning, they could say, well, okay, why don't you not make it payments for the next 3 payments or something until you get another job. We'll let you stay in the house. Don't worry about payments for the next 3 months, and we'll just tack it on later on or something like that. So they can do that kind of stuff. So it may be based on you getting a new job, or you're selling some other property, or you're like, hey, I'm planning on selling my business, and that's going to be ready in 6 months. I'll get that sold, happily pay and make up the months then, but for the next 6 months I just can't do it. Can you cover me? So forbearance, yeah, it happens. So that workout is a document that you're going to work out with the bank, listing out what you're going to do to get things right. And it's a step before we get into foreclosure, right? So can you work something out? Okay, a third option is a HUD loan. That's a housing and urban development. And what happens is you can go to HUD and request a loan, in essence. And it's a loan to bring you back up to speed. So, say you were out for 3 payments, right? So you'd need $3,000 to get back to back to that point where you're good with the bank, right? So you can get this loan from HUD for that $3,000. It'll go to the bank, which gets you current, right? And then what happens is that $3,000 is a loan that you owe back to HUD, so you still owe that, but there's no interest. There's no interest on that one. So it's just the amount. You just owe that $3,000, and whenever the property is sold or you're ready to pay off the whole amount, that's when you have to pay that $3,000 to HUD. So we actually described the scenario already, but a short sale is that situation where you've got that loan amount, and the bank is going to go ahead and sell the house, right? And whatever they sell it for, you're going to make up that difference. Now, in some situations, the bank will do the calculations on this, and they'll say, well, okay, the loan amount is for this 150,000. We think we can sell it for 145,000. We're just going to go ahead and forgive that 5,000. So in a short sale, sometimes the bank is willing to take um, a lower price on the property to get close to the amount that they need to, forgive that loan or break that loan. Because bear in mind, in this situation, the bank's already gotten 50,000 in principal, right? So they look at that and they're very aware of that number, and they say, well, we did make some money on this property, and if we can turn around and flip it and get another renter in there or another, person, yeah, we're willing to forgive a certain amount. So short sales where technically it's under, it's get another color to kind of draw this out. So it's where this is under the amount of the actual loan, right? That's technically what the short sale is. Now another interesting one is a sales and lease back, and this is one that happens really more in investments. So it's a sale. So in that situation, it's kind of like turning you back to a renter, I think. The difference in this situation is that you're not dealing with a bank, but you're really dealing with some sort of investor. So you sell the property to an investor. So you're going to, let's see, sell at, 150,000. Okay. So that happens. Now, sometimes depending on the amount here, you can make a little bit of money on it. But what's different is that, where you're living is still in the house. Okay? And what's happening is you're making payments to stay in there. Basically a renter. So you sell the house, but then retain where you're living as a renter. And by doing so, you've sold and leased back the property. Home Affordable Modification Program, or HAMP. Home Affordable Modification Program. This really is one where rather than trying to foreclose on somebody, what you can do is you can reach out to other banks or investors, and what they try and do is they try and get it down to a certain kind of reasonable payment for you. So if and this is kind of based on some general numbers, but when you get into a house, they start looking at, how much of a monthly payment can you make, and what is that of your take-home pay. And what they ideally like to see is right around 30%. Sometimes it can go up to 40%, but generally they expect your house payment to be that 30%. And so, however, we've had some situations where the loans were higher than that. They're larger, and the person's kind of in trouble. So say they're over here on this 40%, and their income drops because they're a sales guy and nothing's selling, or something like that. Suddenly, they're in trouble. They can't make their payments. So what do? Well, they go and they start reaching out to other banks or investors, and they say, can we modify that interest rate, the number of payments maybe, or maybe modify a down payment. So, work with some of these things here and get it to where we're getting to a new level where their loan, the amount that they're making every month or that they're paying, is right around that 30%. And what was the number? Where did I see it? 31%, I think. So, instead of 30 years, can we go to 40 years? Instead of a, 10% interest rate, can we drop it down to a 2% interest rate? Can we do something and just modify these kind of terms to get it to where, the amount that they're paying is kind of back to a reasonable amount, so that they can kind of keep working their way. That's what a HAMP, or a Home Affordable Modification Program, does. So the HAMP was actually number 6 there. Okay, so another option is the deed in lieu. A deed in lieu, in my mind, is very similar to the concept of mutual rescission. You might have remembered that from, was it back in chapter 10? And that's where you write up a new contract and everyone's kind of returned back to the positions they were before forming the contract. A deed in lieu allows you to pretty much just walk away. You give the deed back to the bank and they just forget your loan and they get the property back. So the reason why this works is usually if the amount of the property, the amount of your debt, is about what they're going to sell the property for. So if they can turn around and sell it for pretty much the same amount that your debt is, you're kind of walking away. It's kind of that break even, or like I said, mutual rescission. Everyone's kind of returned back to where they were. So that's a deed in lieu. Another option is some sort of prepackaged bankruptcy. It allows the borrower to escape payments from some debts. It's just what it sounds like. You're going to come to some sort of agreement with the bank, and they're going to say, well, okay, we're going to do A, you're going to do B, we're going to agree on C, and we're going to do D, and this is what we do in this type of scenario. This is the bad scenario, right? And they've already got it worked out. They're like, this works, we're willing to do this, you're willing to do that. And so, they have these prepackaged situations. And the other piece to this prepackaged bankruptcy is you really are talking to all your creditors. So if there's anyone else that's involved, they're at the table too, deciding, what this is. So that covers mortgages and foreclosures, and kind of addressing it within the context of, a recession or that kind of environment. There's some other terms and concepts, so I encourage you to kind of look those up, but those are the ones that I think are important. Thanks for watching.